Defence and Military Veterans Minister Angie Motshekga is currently attending the United Nations Peacekeeping Ministerial gathering in Berlin. The UN Peacekeeping Ministerial gathering serves as a critical high-level forum where member states convene to reaffirm their political commitment to the United Nations peacekeeping operations and to discuss the future of such missions. The minister has been sharing South Africa's perspective on how peacekeeping should be approached going forward. Now, recently, South Africa and the rest of the other SADC countries that have deployed troops to the eastern DRC confirmed those troops would be withdrawn as the mission comes to an end. 14 South African soldiers were killed in the eastern DRC earlier this year. Let's speak now to Minister Angie Motshekga, who's joining us live from Berlin. A very good evening to you, Minister. I'm grateful for your time. So ahead of your trip to Berlin, you said that now is the time to reimagine peacekeeping as more than just the deployment of forces. What should that reimagined approach be?
One of the key factors from my experience is also to make sure that we do lots of work with communities, so that communities also empowered in terms of understanding their role, understand the role of peacekeepers. But the other thing also that we came through experience was the importance of really working much more broader, so that we, when there is SADC, we ended up working with East African community. So it's to increase partnerships, to make sure that there is engagement with local communities to understand the mandates, but also to clarify the mandates much better, because different peacekeeping efforts are meant to achieve different things because the situations are very different.
And just on that point about understanding the roles and the purpose of the mission, it became very clear that the lines had been blurred when the DRC deployment came into trouble with the killing of those 14 South African soldiers in fighting between the rebels and the Congolese forces, because there were questions about what the nature of the deployment was in the first place. How clear or how easy is it, in fact, to blur the lines between a peacekeeping mission and one that would require involvement in combat?
Yeah, that's why I say it's important to understand the purpose of the mission, because, for instance, in the DRC, we were involved in two different activities. You have UNESCO, whose mandate really it's non-engagement. You have Summit DRC, whose mandate it's not only to observe and non-engage, but there's keep peacekeeping, peace enforcement, but also mediation. And that's why it's very important to understand those mandates. And in the country, there was lots of confusion about the role of Summit DRC, the role of UNESCO, and the role of negotiations. And it's very important to have clarity even in the public about what is the purpose of a specific mission in a specific situation or context.
You mentioned perhaps that there may be, shall we say, a tailor-made approach in each of the missions, even if broadly this would fall under the umbrella of peacekeeping. How much room, though, does that give countries and even United Nations structures? How much room do you have to tailor-make the objectives?
Yeah, because the conflicts differ, and therefore it's very important that in every intervention, there is clarity as to, in this instance, where there is cross-national, what is the role of the peacekeeping, where it's country to country, but sometimes it's rebels inside the country, and sometimes, so there are different challenges that a mission will confront. And that's why at all times you have to clarify, or you have to get a sense of clarity as to when it's internal, it's rebels against its own government, what will be the intervention? If it's cross-border, it's country to country, what do we do? If it's sponsored interventions also, again, what do we need to do? And that's what was also the center of the discussion, to say different conflicts manifest themselves differently, and therefore there needs to be clarity as on the approach, but also an appreciation that it cannot be a tailor-made one-size-fits-all, because, as I say, the conflicts manifest themselves differently and therefore require different approaches in terms of mandate, resources, but also collaborations.
What's tricky for the United Nations, and I reference the UN because you're meeting under the umbrella of the United Nations in Berlin at the moment, is that you've had missions, peacekeeping or otherwise, that have been marred by controversy because even the soldiers are then accused, for example, of committing sexual violence. Some have been accused of theft in these communities. We've had soldiers pulled back, and after they leave, we learn of women who've been impregnated either through sexual relationships or, in fact, sexual abuse committed by the troops. The level of trust then becomes important, is it not, between or from the host country, if we can call them that, and the arriving troops?
No, it's actually also being cited as one of the key challenges that risks actually even undermining the role of peacekeepers, because you find your 10 belligerent soldiers that mask the whole intervention. So the whole question of peacekeeping and not being the peace killers where you're going to intervene, because the main aim is to support civilians. But if civilians are going to be victims in the hands of peacekeepers, then it undermines the entire process. And that's why during training, in the process of deployment, that matter of making sure that there is peacekeeping and not peace destruction in the process. And that's one of the central things that came in. As you correctly say, your sexual exploitation, there was lots of emphasis around SIA. That's why even ourselves as a country which has been deploying, even pledged support to the victims that would have been identified during our deployment, but also put in programs wherein we enforce maintenance in instances where DNAs confirm that those children belong to our soldiers. So there's a whole program, both from the UN, but also from member states, to make sure that women and children are protected. But more important is to prevent even the situation where there is exploitation and there is destruction of peace amongst the very communities that peacekeepers are meant to go and support.
But who is monitoring that the troops, the boots on the ground, are sticking to the mandate of their deployment in these countries? Is it the deploying nations? Is it the United Nations itself? And if so, how much are you able to monitor their conduct when you consider that it could be hundreds or thousands of soldiers deployed at a time, depending on the situation?
Fortunately, the United Nations has huge infrastructure through which it looks at the welfare of the soldiers themselves, the protection of communities, sticking to the mandate and engagement. So there's a whole infrastructure or architecture that the UN uses to, as I say, deploy, to manage, and also to support and monitor. For instance, the cases where we would have been on the wrong side, it's cases that we got through the UN's monitoring team to say, we picked up the following. And even communities know that everywhere you go, there's a UN office, UN presence, and they know that they can always report freely. There's also community liaison officers from UN, which also assist the UN missions in areas where there are difficulties, but also to inform them when there are threats to missions.
And while I have you, Minister, whereabout are we with that process of withdrawal from the Eastern DRC?
No, the process has begun, as I reported last week. We already had deployed the forward team to make sure that the routes are clear and go and set up receiving camps in Tanzania. So we're going through the DRC to Tanzania, and we'll airlift and also move our equipment from Tanzania. So the process has begun, and as I speak, different groups, because it's phased a withdrawal, different teams are already converging in Tanzania. And as soon as we have the entire cohort that we have to airlift, the Chief of Defense has even promised the media that we will invite the media to Tanzania, but we will, hopefully by end of the month of May, would have completed or would have covered the largest part of the withdrawal, and we will arrive in Bloemfontein again in the Free State, but we'll also announce a date when our soldiers will be at our receiving camp. So the process has begun, and we hope to really
Right.
would have done 90% of the work by end of May.
To be clear, 90% of the work being done, does that include the arrival, perhaps, of the first troops touching down in Bloemfontein by the end of this month, the month of May, which ends next week?
That's our intention. So if there are any difficulties, because I'm told some of the problems are roads are not passable as we drive through. If we experience any difficulties, we'll report. But according to the plan, assuming everything equal, we should be having the biggest part of the repatriated soldiers and equipment home by end of May. But if we encounter any experience any difficulties, we again will report.
And when do you intend, just on the issue of reporting, when do you intend, Minister, to appear before Parliament? Because last week, I'm sure you've seen, you were criticised. I think the DA MP, Chris Hutton, even said that you basically failed to show up at the meeting and did not account to South Africans. When can we expect to see you and your team before MPs to give further details about the DRC mission, because there are still lingering questions?
I will definitely do that. I had no appointment with Hutching to go and report on Friday. I had sent an apology to explain that I am coming here. It's a very important program. Myself and Hutching will always be in South Africa, so I will be able to report. But I would not have another Berlin if I didn't come here. So I will report as soon as possible.
Do you know when as soon as possible will be?
It depends on the committee, because I don't convene the committee. I'll indicate, because we did send them an apology, so we expect them to give us another date.
Defence Minister Angie Motshekga, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time, ma'am.